thousands of years, the most powerful empires on Earth made the exact same fatal mistake. They looked at this tiny strip of land wedged between the desert and the sea, and they decided the people living on it needed to be erased. The Egyptians enslaved them for 4 centuries. The Assyrians scattered their tribes to the winds. The Babylonians burned their holiest city to ash and marched their leaders away in chains. The Romans demolished their temple, banned them from their own capital, and renamed the entire land just to erase their memory. Then came the Crusaders, the Ottomans, and finally the Nazis, who built an industrial machine with the singular purpose of killing every last one of them. Any other people would have vanished, completely and permanently, just as it happened to the Philistines, the Hittites, the Moabites, civilizations that were once powerful and are now nothing but ruins and footnotes. But with the Jewish people, something history cannot fully explain kept happening. They refused to disappear. Empire after empire tried to finish them, and empire after empire was itself finished by history. The Assyrians are gone. The Babylonians are gone. The Romans are gone. But the people they tried to destroy are still here, still speaking a version of their ancient language, still reading from the same scrolls. How did a people with no army, no territory, and no political power for nearly 2,000 years survive the most determined attempts at their destruction in all of recorded history? How did they turn exile into a civilization? And how did it happen that a people scattered to every corner of the earth came back to the same hills, the same city, and built one of the most powerful states in the modern Middle East? This is the story of how a single people gave the world its moral conscience, turned the written word into a weapon of survival, and refused across 5,000 years to stop existing. The land we are talking about has a name that has changed many times across history: Canaan, Israel, Judah, Judea, Palestine, the Holy Land. Each name belongs to a different chapter. Each chapter belongs to a different people. But the story of human settlement here goes back much further than any of those names. Around 7,000 BC, some of the earliest agricultural communities on Earth were already established in this region. The settlement of Jericho, sitting in the Jordan Valley, is among the oldest continuously inhabited places in recorded human history. These were not wandering nomads scraping survival from the desert. These were farmers, builders, people who had decided this land was worth staying in. And they were right, because this narrow corridor between the Mediterranean Sea and the desert was one of the most strategically valuable pieces of land in the ancient world. It was the bridge, the only viable land route connecting Africa to Asia, Egypt to Mesopotamia, the Nile to the Euphrates. Every trade caravan, every marching army, every diplomatic envoy moving between the two great poles of ancient civilization had to pass through here. This land was not valuable because it was fertile. It was valuable because of where it sat. And that single geographical fact explains almost everything that happened here for the next 9,000 years. By the 3rd millennium BC, the land of Canaan was a mosaic of city-states, small fortified towns, each controlling their own agricultural hinterland, each paying tribute to whichever great power happened to be dominant at the time. Egypt dominated this corridor for centuries. Pharaohs marched their armies north. Canaanite kings sent tribute south. The relationship was not equality, it was extraction. The Egyptians called this region Retienu. They carved records of their campaigns here onto temple walls. They listed the cities they plundered, the kings they humiliated, the tribute they carried home. To Egypt, Canaan was a resource, a corridor to be taxed and controlled, not a civilization to be respected. And then somewhere in the middle of this ancient world, in a specific moment that historians still debate, in circumstances that archaeology is still slowly uncovering, something happened that would eventually change the entire course of human civilization. A people emerged who called themselves the children of Israel. Their earliest story is one of the most examined narratives in all of human history. Abraham, a man from Ur of the Chaldeans, deep in Mesopotamia, who heard a voice that no one else heard and followed it west into Canaan. In the ancient world, this was not unusual. Every people had gods. Every god had a territory. Every king had divine backing. What was unusual, what was genuinely new, was the nature of the relationship this voice proposed. Not a transaction, not a seasonal ritual, not a sacrifice made to keep a deity satisfied. A covenant, a binding agreement between a people and their God that was personal, historical, and eternal. And what that covenant promised was specific. This land, these descendants, this future. For the first time in recorded religious history, a God was not a force of nature to be appeased. He was a party to a contract. That theological revolution, so quiet, so invisible to the empires around it, would eventually produce 3 of the world's major religions and reshape the moral architecture of the entire planet. But before any of that, there was Egypt. The biblical account of the Israelites in Egypt, the slavery, the plagues, the Exodus, is one of the most debated questions in ancient history. Direct archaeological evidence for a mass exodus of the scale described in Scripture has not been found, but this much is documented. Egypt used Semitic labor extensively. Foreign peoples from Canaan lived and worked inside Egypt for centuries. The name Moses is Egyptian in origin, and the worship of a single invisible God, a concept utterly foreign to Egyptian religion, emerged from this people during precisely this period. Something happened in Egypt. Whatever its exact shape, it produced one of the most consequential religious and legal documents in human history. The 10 Commandments. Not because they were the first laws. The Sumerians had law codes 1500 years earlier, but because these laws were framed not as the decree of a king, but as the direct command of a god to an entire people. Every person, not just the nobility, not just the priesthood. Every person was equally bound. Every person was equally accountable. That idea, radical, almost incomprehensible in the ancient world, is the direct ancestor of the concept of universal human dignity that the modern world still claims to believe in. The Israelites entered Canaan and spent the next several centuries in a complicated, violent, and deeply human process of establishing themselves in a land already occupied. The Book of Judges describes this period honestly, a cycle of consolidation, fragmentation, foreign domination, and desperate recovery that reads less like a triumphant conquest and more like the messy reality of a people still finding their shape. Around 1000 BC, that shape crystallized. A king named David unified the 12 tribes of Israel into a single kingdom and captured a Canaanite city that would become the most contested piece of real estate in all of human history, Jerusalem. David made it his capital, not because it was large, it wasn't. Not because it was wealthy, it wasn't that either. He chose it because it sat on the border between the northern and southern tribes. It belonged to no single tribe. It could belong to all of them. It was a political masterstroke. His son Solomon built the first temple on the ridge above the city, a permanent home for the Ark of the Covenant, the physical representation of the covenant between Israel and their God. For a brief moment, the kingdom was whole. Then it split. After Solomon's death, The kingdom fractured along the seam David had tried to seal. The northern kingdom kept the name Israel. The southern kingdom, centered on Jerusalem, became Judah. Two peoples, one inheritance. And the great empires of the ancient world were already circling. In 722 BC, the Assyrians, the most feared military force of the age, swept down from the north and erased the northern kingdom entirely. 10 tribes of Israel were deported, scattered across the Assyrian Empire, and vanished from history. Gone so completely that their fate became one of antiquity's great mysteries. The 10 lost tribes, searched for and speculated about for 2,500 years. Only Judah remained. It did not remain long. In 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon marched on Jerusalem. He breached the walls. He burned the city. He destroyed the temple, the physical, theological, and emotional center of everything the people of Judah believed about themselves and their God. And then he did what the Assyrians had done to the north. He deported the population. The king, the priests, the nobles, the craftsmen, taken in chains to Babylon. This was not supposed to be survivable. In the ancient world, when a people's temple was destroyed, it meant their God had been defeated. Other conquered peoples accepted this logic and dissolved into the cultures that absorbed them. The people of Judah refused. Sitting by the rivers of Babylon, they did something no conquered people had done before on this scale. They wrote everything down, the stories, the laws, the history, the prophecies, the poetry of their grief. They created the text that would become the Hebrew Bible, not in their homeland, not in their temple, but in exile, in captivity, surrounded by one of the greatest empires on earth. They transformed their religion from one centered on a physical temple in a specific location into one that could exist anywhere, carried in memory and text. That transformation saved them. In 539 BC, Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon and issued a decree that stunned the ancient world. All captive peoples were free to return home. The Jews, as they were now increasingly called, the people of Judah, were permitted to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. They went back. They built the second temple on the same ridge where the first had stood. And for the next several centuries, Judea existed as a province, under Persia, then under the Greeks following Alexander's conquest, then under the successors of Alexander, the Ptolemies of Egypt and the Seleucids of Syria. The Seleucid king Antiochus IV made a decision that would echo through history. He banned Jewish religious practice. He installed a statue of Zeus in the temple. He made it a capital offense to keep the Sabbath or circumcise a child. He believed, as every ruler before him had believed, that a conquered people could simply be absorbed. He was wrong. In 167 BC, a priest named Mattathias and his 5 sons, the Maccabees, launched a guerrilla uprising that drove the Seleucids out of Jerusalem and rededicated the temple. That rededication is still celebrated every year. It is called Hanukkah. But independence did not last. In 63 BC, the Roman general Pompey marched into Jerusalem and made Judea a Roman province. Rome was efficient and ruthless. It tolerated local customs as long as taxes were paid and order was maintained. For a time, the arrangement held. Then, in 66 AD, after decades of Roman misrule, heavy taxation, and deliberate humiliation of Jewish religious practice, the province exploded, the Great Jewish Revolt. Rome did not send a police force, it sent 4 legions. In 70 AD, after a siege of devastating brutality, famine inside the walls, crucifixions outside them, bodies stacked in the streets. Roman forces under Titus breached Jerusalem's walls and burned the Second Temple to the ground. The historian Josephus, who witnessed it, wrote that the city had been so thoroughly destroyed that no one who had not seen it beforehand would believe it had ever been inhabited. 1 million dead, nearly 100,000 enslaved. The temple, the Second Temple, rebuilt after the first, was destroyed by Babylon. Gone. The Arch of Titus still stands in Rome today. Carved on its inner wall is an image of Roman soldiers carrying the temple's menorah through the streets of Rome in triumph. It was the greatest catastrophe in Jewish history, and still, they did not disappear. A second revolt in 132 AD, the Bar Kokhba revolt, was crushed even more completely. The Romans renamed the province Syria Palestina, deliberately erasing the name Judea from the map. Jerusalem was rebuilt as a Roman city called Aelia Capitolina, and Jews were banned from entering it. The Great Dispersion, the diaspora, that had begun in Babylon now became permanent and global. Jewish communities spread across the Roman Empire, across Persia, across Arabia, across North Africa. Everywhere they went, they carried the text, the Torah, the Talmud, the vast written record of centuries of legal debate and interpretation that became the portable homeland of a people without a land. No temple, no king, no territory, and yet the identity held. In 313 AD, the Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity across the Roman Empire, and the entire character of Jerusalem changed. The city became the holiest site in Christendom. Churches were built. Pilgrims arrived from across the empire. The land was now sacred not just to Jews, but to the new dominant religion of the Western world. Then in 637 AD, Arab armies under the Caliph Umar captured Jerusalem from the Byzantine Empire. The city was now holy to three faiths simultaneously. The site where the temple had stood, the Temple Mount, was the place from which, according to Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad had ascended to heaven. The Dome of the Rock was built there in 691 AD. 3 religions, 1 hill. The geography of conflict for the next 14 centuries was set. The Crusaders arrived in 1099 and massacred the city's inhabitants, Muslims, Jews, and Eastern Christians alike. The Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem lasted less than 90 years before Saladin retook the city in 1187, without a massacre, in deliberate contrast. The Mamluks followed. Then the Ottomans. In 1517, Suleiman the Magnificent absorbed the entire region into the Ottoman Empire, where it would remain for 400 years. During all of this, through crusades, through Mongol invasions, through plague, through 4 centuries of Ottoman rule, Jewish communities remained in the land, small, marginalized, but present, always present. By the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was collapsing and Europe's great powers were already positioning themselves over its remains. And in Europe itself, something was happening to Jewish communities that had been building for centuries. Persecution was not new. Pogroms were not new. Expulsion was not new. Jews had been expelled from England in 1290, from France repeatedly, from Spain in 1492, taking their communities and their texts and rebuilding elsewhere, again and again. But in the late 19th century, a journalist named Theodor Herzl watched a French military officer named Alfred Dreyfus, Jewish, decorated, loyal, publicly stripped of his rank before a screaming crowd chanting death to the Jews. And Herzl concluded something that changed history. Emancipation was not enough. Assimilation was not enough. As long as Jews lived as minorities inside other people's nations, they were permanently vulnerable. The only solution was a state. He called the movement Zionism, and he spent the rest of his short life building it. The First World War destroyed the Ottoman Empire and left Britain holding the territory it called Mandatory Palestine. In 1917, the British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour wrote a letter, one paragraph, promising British support for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The letter did not mention the Arab population already living there, except as a subordinate clause. That omission would echo for the next century. Jewish immigration to Palestine accelerated through the 1920s and 1930s. Arab resistance intensified. The British tried to manage an impossible situation and satisfied no one. Then came the Holocaust. 6 million Jews murdered in the heart of Europe. A third of the entire Jewish people on earth systematically killed by the most educated, most technologically advanced nation on the continent. The argument for a Jewish state, already powerful, became, for most of the world, unanswerable. In 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Mandatory Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jewish leadership accepted. The Arab states rejected it. On May 14, 1948, 78 years ago today, David Ben-Gurion stood in Tel Aviv and declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The next day, 5 Arab armies invaded. Israel survived. That war, called the War of Independence by Israelis and the Nakba, the catastrophe, by Palestinians, created realities that have not been resolved since. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled or were expelled. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were expelled from Arab countries. A new state was born in the convulsion. Wars followed. 1956, 1967, 1973. Each one reshaping the map. Each one adding layers to a conflict that the entire world has opinions about and no one has solved. In 1967, Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza, Sinai, and the Golan Heights in 6 days. A military operation so swift, it reshaped the entire strategic balance of the Middle East. The Sinai was eventually returned to Egypt in a peace deal. The others were not. Peace agreements with Egypt in 1979, with Jordan in 1994. Negotiations with the Palestinians that have started and collapsed more times than anyone can count. And the Temple Mount, that small hill in Jerusalem where the first temple stood, where the second temple stood, where the Dome of the Rock now stands, remains the most contested piece of ground on earth. Today, Israel is a country of 9 million people in a piece of land the size of New Jersey. It has the most advanced technology sector in the Middle East. It has compulsory military service. It has a parliament and a free press and a Supreme Court. It also has unresolved questions that have defined the region for nearly 80 years and show no sign of resolution. The story of this land is 9,000 years old, and it is not finished. But here is what 9,000 years of this history actually shows. Empires decided this land did not matter and then spent generations fighting over it. Great powers tried to erase the people connected to it and could not. A people was exiled, scattered across the entire known world, forbidden from their holiest city, stripped of their temple twice, and came back. Not because of military power, not because of political strength, because of a story that survived Babylon, survived Rome, survived the diaspora, survived the medieval world, survived the worst crime in modern European history. No other people in recorded history has maintained a continuous identity across this span of time, without a state, without a territory, without a king. Whatever you believe about the politics of today, whatever position you hold on the conflicts of the present, the fact of that survival across 9,000 years of this particular strip of land is one of the most extraordinary stories in all of human civilization, and it is still being written